Introduction. Culture Warriors. You Marines don't trust anyone, do you? President Harry S. Truman to the Commandant of the Marine Corps, 1947. Before World War II, the United States Marine Corps was tiny, unpopular, and institutionally disadvantaged. Numbering just 50,000 men, it accounted for only 3% of active duty military in June 1941. As a separate naval service inside the Department of the Navy, the Marines had little control over their budget or equipment purchases, and always came second in the Secretary of the Navy's attention. Their highest-ranking officer, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, was a 2-star Major General and had no seat on the newly created Joint Chiefs of Staff. Nor were they as popular or well-respected as they are today. In a wide-ranging national opinion survey conducted just before Pearl Harbor, both young men of enlistment age and their parents named the Marines as the least attractive military service, attributing to them a reputation for rowdiness and hard living. And there's a footnote. By the start of the Vietnam War, the Marines' position in American society and the Department of Defense was quite different. The Commandant was, by this point, a 4-star general with a seat on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. A strong bipartisan coalition of lawmakers in Congress had authored a series of legislative protections for the Corps, which prevented the President from making major cuts to its manpower funding. A broad network of journalists who had served in the Corps defended its interests in print. The things the Navy bought for the Marines' use, aviation and amphibious ships, got to turn the page, in particular, had significantly increased since the start of the Cold War. I got to open the book wider, crack it open wider without hurting the spine. As had the Marines' own budget. As a result, by 1965, the Corps was roughly 4 times as large as it had been in 1941. It was considerably more powerful inside the Department, and it was considerably more powerful inside the Department of the Defense. The Marine Corps mission had also changed since World War II. Then it had one particular purpose: to seize temporary bases for the Navy by attacking enemy-held islands from the sea. By 1965, the Marines had transformed themselves into a multi-purpose quick reaction force that floated throughout the world's oceans on the Navy's ships. When ordered into action, they arrived in days or even hours. These were not the naval landing parties that had existed in ages past. These Marines came equipped with their own helicopters, jets, tanks, artillery, engineers, and mechanics, plus enough supplies to sustain themselves for 14 days of fighting. They were global shock troops who provided the President with on-call military power for any contingency ranging from a natural disaster to sustained non-nuclear combat. The technical name for these units was Marine Air Ground Task Forces, or more generally, the amphibious forces in readiness. Marines today refer to it as America's 911 force. This cultural history of the United States Marine Corps, a study of the stories, assumptions, and habits of mind of the smallest of the 4 armed services. It relates how, over a period of 25 years, the Marines created a set of narratives for and about themselves that attained wide legitimacy within their organization and without. The Corps' stories strengthened its solidarity, binding Marines together in a community as strong as any in the world. Stories helped them expand their alliances with politicians, journalists, and other civilians who rallied to their defense in times of need. Stories energized and focused Corps members, albeit sometimes against civilians and other inappropriate targets. The Marines' ideology even sharpened their preparations for Cold War defense, making their organization one of the sharpest and swiftest tools of American power. Ultimately, the Corps culture has been its greatest asset, supporting both internal cohesion and its institutional expansion. Most historians attribute the Marines' institutional growth to their heroics in combat, particularly in World War II and Korea. That is only part of the story. From 1941 to 1965, the Marines did not just fight wars and rest on the laurels they had earned in them. They played an active and interventionist role in American society and politics. They recruited newspapermen into their ranks and nurtured relationships with civilian journalists, editors, and publishers. They sent veterans into politics and built a grassroots network of supporters across the country. Friends in Hollywood kept the Corps name in the limelight. Political operatives in Washington orchestrated congressional support. Through careful marketing, public relations, spectacles, and bare-knuckle politics, the Marines insulated themselves into the American media, government, and everyday life. The Marines did not grow their power by foisting themselves on an unwilling public, however. They formed alliances with civilians that yielded benefits for both sides. Newspaper editors used Marine stories to sell papers. Filmmakers did the same thing to bring viewers to the theaters. Political candidates advertised their Marine Corps connections to get elected. Once in office, they made common cause with the Corps for a variety of reasons. These coalitions were critical to the Corps' growing cultural power, but the Marines did not control the relationships. Civilians had the say, and sometimes they were the most prolific distributors of Marine Corps stories and images. Other studies have tried to explain the Marines' cultural power by comparing them to the samurai, Spartans, or other warrior classes. Footnote. This one does not, meaning this book. Cultural similarities may exist across the services, indeed even across the centuries and continents, but every military organization exists in a specific time and place. And while comparisons have their benefit, they also require distortions to make the subjects fit the argument. I am content to argue the following three general points. First, in the 25 years studied here, the Marines thought and acted differently than any other American armed services, a point accepted as obvious by those who know the Marines, but left largely unexplored by historians. Marine culture may not have been entirely unique or exceptional, but it was so to them, and in that end, that made all the difference. At the root of the Marines' ideas about themselves were narratives of exceptionalism, an ideology which made them feel separate from and superior to everyone else, both soldiers and civilians. This exceptionalism, with its attendant sentiments of insularity and mistrust of outsiders, was the first principle of Marine Corps culture. Second, the Marine Corps' sense of their own exceptionalism, which existed before World War II, grew stronger in the years studied here and became an increasingly valuable asset for their institution. Motivated by a combination of loyalty, pride, and fear, the Corps built a robust infrastructure of political and public relations support that protected its interests during wartime and peacetime. While all the armed services attempted similar moves, the Marine Corps was arguably the most successful at it. The outreach infrastructure, checking the time. The outreach infrastructure the Marines built in the 1940s remains in place to this day and is one of the sources of its contemporary popularity and power. Finally, the Marines' culture not only helped their organization, but also had long-lasting effects on American society, national defense, and eventually the United States' role in the world. The modern Marine Corps, an elite force of first responders with a global reach, came of age in the first decade of the Cold War. Footnote. Since then, it has grown more popular in American society and more powerful inside the national security establishment. Over the past 11 years, in times of peace and war, Americans have routinely ranked the Marine Corps as the most prestigious military service by a healthy margin. Footnote. In the past 4 political administrations, Marines and former Marines have held some of the highest positions in American national security leadership, including Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, Chairman and Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretary of the Navy, and a host of other senior military positions. The Marines now compose roughly 14% of the active duty armed forces and 26% of all ground forces. Footnote. Over the past 20 years, the number of military operations involving the Marines' amphibious forces has more than doubled. And while they still rely on a close partnership with the Navy, the Marines have moved well beyond service aboard ships. Indeed, if there is any country on Earth where amphibious forces should be irrelevant, it is Afghanistan, and yet the Marines are heavily engaged there today. And the commander of all U.S. and NATO forces in the country is a U.S. Marine. The Corps' cultural operations in World War II and the early Cold War established the preconditions for this global system of amphibious military power. I think I'm running out of time, but as a civilian, respectfully, happy birthday, Marines.